for Music Student 101. It's a good day to learn some music theory. Feel free to follow along with this episode, number 5, on our website, musicstudent101.com. Here are your hosts, Jeremy Burns and Matthew Scott Phillips.
And welcome back to Music Student 101. Today we're going to be talking about major scales and key signatures and how to identify them, and also some cool tricks that we've learned along the way to make that a bit easier. It is a bit of a theory-heavy episode, so as our good announcer Mike Cunliffe has mentioned on occasion, you may want to go ahead and follow along on our website. And as mentioned, you can go there to find some graphics and study aids, things that'll help all this really come together a bit better for you. One more time, that's musicstudent101.com. Click on podcast and go to this episode, number 5, Major Scales and Key Signatures. I'm going to let Matt take it away. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about scales, learning how to know what scale you're in very quickly and very easily, which is also the same as knowing what key you're in quickly and easily. You know, when you hear musicians say, you know, this piece is in the key of G or this piece is in the key of E flat, you know, what they're saying is that there is a major scale comprised of notes, and that is the scale we are using, which is what key means. So the key of E flat, for example, will be music comprised of notes from the E flat major scale, and occasionally notes that are not from that scale, but we can get into that later. So scales work on half steps and whole steps. So you need to know what those are. Anything from a white key on the keyboard going to the nearest black key, either up or down, that is a half step. So what I'm doing here is going from C up to the nearest black key, going upwards in pitch on the piano, which is moving to the right of the piano, just by one note up to that nearest black key. That is a half step. In this case, from C to C sharp.
Otherwise known as a minor second interval.
Otherwise known as a minor second interval, our good Jaws interval. So, and also going from C sharp, and again, just moving up to the next nearest white key, moving towards the right of the piano, up to D, also a half step. So C up to the nearest black key, which is C sharp, is a half step. C sharp, moving up again to the next nearest white key, which is D, is a half step. And C to D would be what?
I believe that would be a whole step.
Right, that would be a whole step. 2 halves make a whole. You have to know your fractions to study music. It's just unescapable.
And I thought I got into music because I was none too good at figuring.
Yeah, well, you know, they say musicians only have to count to 4, right? So, So, all right. And this also works going down. So going from, if I was to play this A, you know, going down to the next lowest black key, moving to the left of the keyboard, which is A flat or G sharp, we can talk about that in a minute, is also a half step. And then moving down again from that A flat down to G, also a half step. And then, of course, moving down to from A down to G is a whole step. Good and easy, right?
Right.
So there are just a couple of exceptions to this, but these exceptions are really, really important. They are, if you're looking at a keyboard, you'll notice there is no black key between the notes B and C. Now this has to do with some things called equal temperament, which is a big, long discussion that we will probably have at a later point. But for now, just know that B to C, even though it's a white key to a white key, which is what we would consider a whole step normally, in this case, and if you're really good with your interval dictation, you'll notice that's a minor second. B to C is just a half step.
Any more examples?
Yes, one more. E to F. Also, if you look on your keyboard, you realize there's no black key between E to F. Mm-hmm. So E to F, also a half step. If you wanted to go a whole step above E, that would actually land you on F sharp, which is a black key. And the same thing holds true for B. If you wanted to go a whole step above B, that would land you to C sharp.
Right.
So two very important distinctions, and please keep those in mind. Otherwise, moving from a white key to a black key is generally a half step consecutively. Moving from a black key to a white key, generally a half step. Moving from a black key to a black key, generally a whole step. Moving from a white key to a white key, generally a whole step, except for those two exceptions.
Right.
B to C and E to F. And we call these chromatic half steps when they employ the same letter name. For example, when I say C to C sharp, we would call that a chromatic half step if we were calling it C sharp. If we were calling that note D flat, we would call that a diatonic half step because the letter name changes.
Gotcha.
So C to D flat, diatonic, C to C sharp, chromatic, even though you're talking about the same note. We'll talk about that in just a second. And, you'll notice us using words like sharps and flats. When we say sharp, what we mean is that tone has been raised by a half step. Mm-hmm. So if you take A, you go up a half step, we will call that A sharp. It's just raising that tone by a half step. When we say flat, we are lowering it by a half step. So if we go from A down to A flat, then that has just been lowered to that nearest black key down. And that is a half step down. Natural is a tone that hasn't been altered. In other words, they are the white keys.
Okay.
C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Very easy. And as promised, the inharmonic equivalents. You'll also notice sometimes we talk about going from G to G sharp, and sometimes we talk about going from G to A flat. You'll notice we're talking about the same key here. We're talking about the same black key.
The same note, yeah.
Right, yeah. That is called an inharmonic equivalent. So this is G sharp or A flat, same note. Sometimes it's easier to talk about it as being a raised G, where it would be G sharp. Sometimes it is easier to talk about it as A flat, where it is a lowered A, depending on the scale you're using and some other things.
Depending on what key you're in, right?
Exactly. And there are such a thing as double sharps and double flats, which is, in a case of a double sharp, raising the note by a half step and then raising that note again, to create a whole step in general. And that is, of course, inharmonically equivalent to some natural note. If I was to say F double sharp, for example, would be inharmonically equivalent to G.
Right.
D double flat, inharmonically equivalent to C. And then again, sometimes especially when you get into some diminished chords and things, it becomes much easier to talk about them in double flats and double sharps. Although, that is a little less common. And there's even triple sharps and triple flats, which are very, very uncommon. You won't find yourself talking about those a whole lot, but they do exist.
So let's review real quick the key terms we're talking about here. Chromatic.
Right. Chromatic is a half step up or down in which the note name doesn't change.
Right.
A to A sharp or A to A flat.
Copy that. Diatonic
is a half step up or down in which the note name does change, which is usually the other side of the inharmonic equivalent. So A to B flat or A to G sharp.
And then one more time, inharmonic equivalents.
Inharmonic equivalents are notes that have different names, but you're talking about the same note. For example, G sharp or A flat, depending on whether you raised a G or lowered an A, but you're still talking about the same note.
So G sharp and A flat are known to be inharmonically equivalent.
Exactly.
Okay.
Very good.
All right, then, moving on.
All right, moving on. So this is very important in our discussion of scales, and I'll show you why. If you remember from before, we have this C major scale.
For those of you who aren't watching, Matt has obviously had his class piano because he was using the proper fingering to go over those scales.
Absolutely. Here's to you, Miss Rust. You taught me well despite my despite my coming in 10 minutes late to every class and spending half the time, just playing jazz riffs on my piano. You nevertheless managed to teach me something. That is a credit to this wonderful woman.
Everyone said she was a hard ass, but she was actually a very patient and tolerant woman.
She was, in her own way. She was very patient and tolerant. Definitely with me, and I frustrated her no end. I know, and she was a very good piano teacher.
But we digress.
So the C major scale, something that of course is very special about the C major scale, is the fact that it is played totally on the white keys. It is all natural notes. There are no sharps or flats in the C major scale. I'm just starting on C and playing all white keys. The reason this does this is because of a special way we have of constructing a major scale. So you'll notice that if I'm playing all white keys, from C to D is a whole step, as we've discovered. From D to E, another whole step, as we've discovered. But as we've also discovered, when we go from E to F, because there's no black key between E to F, that is only a half step. So we've gone up a whole step, and then up only a half step. And then from there, from F to G, is another whole step. From G to A is another whole step. From A to B is another whole step. And then to get back from B to C, again, because of there not being a black key between B and C, because of all that grade equal temperament stuff that you don't have to need to know right now, we have another half step to get us back to C. So we have this particular pattern of half steps and whole steps in the C major scale, where we start with C and go whole, half, whole, half. You know, two wholes and a half, 3 holes and a half.
So that is the basic pattern of a major scale.
Absolutely
So
right.
if you learn this pattern, if you just don't think about what notes you're on, if you just learn this pattern on whatever instrument you play, you can memorize the pattern that you use and switch it anywhere you want to on that instrument for the most part.
That is exactly right. And fretted string players, like bass players, which Jeremy and I both are, and guitarists and mandolin players, have this great advantage of being able to basically learn this pattern rather than having to learn different combinations of fingerings to get different scales.
Right. It might make a difference, I guess, if you're a horn player or maybe a...
Right. Yeah. When players don't have that advantage, they have to really know these chops very well. Which is not to say that string players don't have to know this stuff. String players, don't start slacking on me now. Okay?
And my apologies to the horn players for me simplifying it like that, too.
Right. These horn players are going, it's so much harder than that. Yeah. Believe me, we know. We don't have time to talk about it now.
Right.
So, as Jeremy was saying, you can apply this pattern of whole steps and half steps to any scale. You can think about it as the fingerprint of the major scale. It is the DNA of the major scale, and the major scale can be a concept in and of itself, really completely removed from what notes you happen to be playing it on, which means that we can make a major scale on literally any key we want, any note we want. If I was to start on A rather than on C, we could use the same pattern. So we start on A, and we go up a whole step, and then we go up another whole step. So we went from A to B. We're going up another whole step from B to what, Jeremy?
That would be a C sharp.
That would be a C sharp. So B to C sharp. Now we have our half step, our first half step, which takes us from C sharp to D. Yeah. We have another whole step from D to E. We have another whole step from E to F sharp, remember, because this is our exception. So E to F sharp. We have a whole step from F sharp to, what would be that whole step?
F sharp to G sharp.
G sharp, good. Having to think a minute there, huh? It's trickier than it looks. Yeah, black key to a black key is a whole step. So F sharp to G sharp, and then that final half step is going to take us back to our tonic A. And so now we have the A major scale.
So to review, we got major scales comprised of a certain pattern that is whole step, half step, whole step, half step.
Exactly right.
Now, if you don't have, like myself, the brain capacity to carry those things around all the time, is there some other ways?
Right, because it gets really difficult, doesn't it? I mean, trying to have to map out all this stuff out right before you go to play in a key.
Do musicians think like that? I don't think we think like that.
I don't really think like that. But there is an easier way to think about this, and that is with the circle of fifths. So,
which could be a podcast in itself, right?
Which could be a podcast in itself. So with the circle of fifths, the idea behind the circle of fifths is that as you go up 5 notes, you add a new sharp, or as you go down 5 notes, you add a new flat to the scales you're playing. So if I started with C, which is, of course, no sharps, no flats, it's just all natural notes, all white keys. Really easy way to do this. To start with, you count up 5 notes. C, D, E, F, G. And we're on G. So now we're going to play from G to G with one little exception. We are going to raise the 7th note. The last note before tonic, we are going to raise that to a sharp. Sharp the 7th. So we're going to play G, A, B, C, D, E, and to preserve that pattern of whole steps and half steps, we have to raise F to F sharp, which gives us our last whole step, and then F sharp to G is going to lead us back to tonic. And this is the G major scale. Yeah. So count up 5 notes, play the scale, sharp the 7th note, and you have the next scale along the circle of fifths. Moving, if you want to think of the circle of fifths as a clock or a circle, intuitively enough, think of it as going clockwise along that circle.
Yeah, let's put C at the very top. Let's put C at 12 o'clock noon, right?
Right, yes, and that makes G at 1 o'clock.
Right.
And so let's do that again. We're on G, and I'll move an octave down here. And let's do it again. We'll count up 5 notes. G, A, B, C, D. And now let's play from D to D, maintaining the F sharp. Once that F sharp is there, it's not going to go away. But also, once again, sharping the 7th note, raising that last note before we get to tonic. And we're going to have D, E, F sharp, which stayed over, G, A, B, and then raising that last note to get our whole step to C sharp and our half step to D. And now we have the D major scale.
So we're starting off with the key signature of C major, which has no sharps or flats.
Right.
Every time you move up a fifth from that tonic, from that note, whatever note you start on, the key of that note you land on, in this case G, you add 1 sharp.
Right.
You go up from G to D, you add another sharp.
Right, at the 7th note.
At the 7th note.
Right, so you are sharping the 7th every time you go up.
Okay.
So let's talk about those flat keys.
Okay.
So these flat keys are keys that, with one exception, are starting on black notes. You notice that as we went up the circle of fifths and we're adding all of these sharps, we're using natural notes as our tonic, as our starting and ending notes. So from C to G to D to A to E to B, with the exceptions of F sharp and C sharp, we have been basically on the white keys. If you want to start on the black keys, what you're usually talking about is a flat key, with the one exception, and the exception is really easy because this is the very first one. In the case of the flat keys, we're going to do something very similar. We're going to start on C, which has no sharps or flats. We are going to, in this case, count up 4. C, D, E, F. And just like last time, we're going to now play from F to F, but in this time, we're not going to sharp the 7th, we are going to flat the 4th.
Flat the 4th, okay.
That 4th note in our scale, we are going to lower by a half step. So we are going to play F, G, A, and this 4th note, we are going to lower by a half step. This B is going to become B flat, and then continue on C, D, E, F. And now we have the F major scale, which is our one exception. It is the only white key scale that is what we call a flat key, that has a flat key signature.
I never thought about that up until just now. But yeah, I guess F is the only white key that has a flat key signature.
Indeed. And once again, the reason we're doing this is just to preserve that original pattern of half steps and whole steps. We're sharpening stuff and flatting stuff so that no matter what note we start on, we still have that same pattern of half steps and whole steps that is the major scale. Mm-hmm. That's why it keeps working. That's why it keeps sounding like a major scale no matter where I start on. So let's do this a couple more times. We're going to start on F, we're going to count up 4, F, G, A, preserving the B flat, just like the sharps. Once the flats get in, they don't leave.
Yeah, okay.
We are going to be on B flat, and now we're going to play from B flat to B flat, C, D, and again, this 4th note, we're going to lower from E to E flat, and continue on from A to B flat at the top. And now we have the B flat major scale. We can keep going with these. From if we want to do the next one, we start on B flat, we count up 4, and you may have noticed we're always landing on the note we just flatted because we're flatting the 4th note, we're counting up 4, so we keep ending up on that, and it keeps being a black key, and it will continue to do so. So we end up on E flat, we play E flat to E flat, and we flat that 4th note, which in this case would be A flat, and we have the E flat major scale.
Okay, so up to this point, I think we've been talking about how to find out how many flats or sharps are in a specific key, right?
Right.
Let's talk about how to look at a key signature and know by looking at it what key you're in.
Right, good point. Because again, this still sounds very difficult, right? You know, Jeremy, you've played in a lot of gigs before, and people say things like, let's just jam in the blues on E.
Right.
Do those people naturally give you a chance to get out your paper or your iPhone or, sit at the keyboard and think, okay, E, well, I'll start on C, I'll go up to D, and then,
Certainly not the night of the show.
No, not the night of the show, and they really don't want you doing that during practice either. They're sitting over there going, come on, man, what are you doing?
Aren't you going to school for this?
Yeah, aren't you going to school for this? You're supposed to be better at this than us. Well, you will be, don't worry. There's a really easy way to come up with this. And we have these things called the order of sharps and the order of flats. And all this is talking about is the order in which we were either adding these sharps or adding these flats. As I said, when I was moving up this scale, I was saying, well, once F sharp is in there, it doesn't leave. You stay F sharp all the way around the circle of fifths. Same thing for C sharp, same thing for G sharp. Once they're in there, they leave. So the order of sharps are just that order in which those sharps came in. And that order is F, C, G, D, A, E, B. And believe me, mnemonic devices are your friends when you're learning music.
Yeah, they really are.
Well,
For this one, for example, I still have in my head what my teacher told me. Say you're looking at a key signature and it's got sharps in it, You start off with the first sharp, that'll be an F sharp. And moving up, F, C, G, D, A, E, B. Each time you add a sharp, that's what the letter is going to be. So
right.
What one of my professors came up with was Fat Charlie goes down and eats breakfast.
Yes, that's a good one.
That can be a little lewd if you have the imagination that I do. And honestly, the more lewd, really, the better. The more disgusting or,
You're less likely to forget it. I learned fat cows get drunk after eating breakfast.
Okay.
For the order of sharps. There's also fat cows get diarrhea after eating breakfast.
That's pretty foul.
Yeah. Or Fat Charlie gets diarrhea after eating berries. Or, yeah. So whatever it takes to remember it.
Hopefully that'll stick in your heads, and if not, come up with your own. It's often better if you come up with your own.
And
honestly.
email us some of the ones you come up with. We love. I'm a collector of these.
Yeah,
I love them. So feel free to email us some neat ones that you thought of.
You might can trump us. So
Probably will.
There's the order of sharps, and another easy way that I found to do the order of sharps is the from left to right, the last sharp on the key signature on the farthest right end will be the leading tone to the note of the key that the scale is in.
Absolutely correct. So what we're talking about here is, because we were sharping the 7th note, and that half step that's on the end of our half step, whole step pattern, it means that your tonic note is going to be a half step up from the last sharp you added. So if you're looking at a piece of music and it's got 4 sharps sticking there, well, you just think, okay, well, that's pretty easy. F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp. What's a half step up from D sharp?
That would be an E.
So we're in the key of E here.
There you go.
E major.
To me, that was the easiest way.
Or C sharp minor, but we'll talk about that on another podcast.
Right. The relative minors, right?
Right, yeah. Fun stuff coming up. But for now, we're just talking about major scales. And for now, it's safe to assume that, if you see 4 sharps in a key signature, the very strong possibility is that it's in the key of E, because the key of E does in fact have 4 sharps, and those sharps are F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. And I got those just by reading the sequence of the order of sharps. Fat cows get drunk after eating breakfast. So we got to drunk. Fat cows get drunk, and that's E. A really quick way I have always had of remembering my sharps is I think of writing these capital letters for these keys. So for example, you can write a capital letter G with 1 pen stroke. You don't have to take your hand off of the paper to write capital G. So 1 pen stroke means the key of G has 1 sharp, and that sharp is F sharp. Remember, to find out what sharps we need, we just go down the order of sharps. If you write a capital D, it takes 2 pen strokes. You write the vertical line, then the little swoop that is the D, that is 2 pen strokes. The key of D has 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp. To write a capital letter A, 3 pen strokes. Just imagine yourself writing it. 1, 2, 3. Exactly. And that is 3 sharps, which is F sharp, C sharp, G sharp. The key of A, with the key of E, 4, because it has a vertical line and 3 horizontal ones. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sharps is the key of E. If you think of B, if you sort of have to think of maybe like a B from the Greek alphabet. Instead of using the double swoop for the B, you sort of use straight lines so it comes out looking triangular. If you do that, you'll find that it takes 5 pen strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is 5 pen strokes, 5 sharps, which is the key of B, which of course is F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp. Just writing down the order of sharps. That works up until F sharp. It falls apart at F sharp, unfortunately, but at that point you only have 2 to remember. F sharp has 6 sharps, C sharp has 7.
Cool.
Yeah. Order of flats, very similar situation. The order of flats are B, E, A, D, G, C, F. So the first flat we added when we were counting up 4 was B flat. The second flat we added was E flat. The third was A flat. Going through this order of B, E, A, D, G, C, F, my professor just looked at that and said, bead gesif. Bead, G, C, F. I've also heard bead girls can't find. That's about as good as I know for those.
I got one.
Oh, yeah?
Big Ed and Dan go camping frequently.
Oh, that's a good one. That's
Yeah,
a
man.
really good one. Yeah, Big Ed and Dan go camping frequently. Yeah, and if you want to think of Big Ed and Dan as being flat drunk, then that's the order of flats. They get flat drunk when they go camping. So.
Who doesn't?
Well, that's what camping is for, man.
Totally.
I mean, do you think you're going to sit out in the woods, and get all dirty and smoke in your eyes and be sober? No, that's no fun.
No, hell no.
Okay. One other thing on the subject of knowing the order of flats, it also happens to be the order of sharps backwards.
In reverse, right.
Yeah. So that is something that I find neat.
And one day, this is all going to sound like a bunch of dribble, but one day it's all going to click and it'll make sense.
I promise you it will click,
Yes.
and it will just become the simplest thing in the world, and you won't be able to believe someone doesn't know that.
Right. Much like how we found a leading tone to lead us into the whatever key a sharp key might be in, let's find a way to simplify it.
So yeah, a simple thing to think is that if you look at something and you see 5 flats in it, and you think, well, I know this must be a flat key. It probably starts on a black note since it's a flat key. There's only one exception to that.
Mm-hmm.
Then how do I know which scale I'm looking at? Well, if it's got 5 flats, always remember the key you're in, the major scale you're using, is 1 flat behind the number of flats that you're looking at. So if you're looking at something and it has 5 flats in it, then you think B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat. You're 1 flat out from the key. So you are in D flat if you see 5 flats. F is our one exception, remember. F is the only white key that scale has a flat key signature. It has one flat. So the key signature to F is one flat. That flat is B flat. And then the key signature to B flat has two flats. That key signature is B flat and E flat. The key signature to E flat has three flats: B flat, E flat, A flat. And what I'm doing here, the way I'm getting which notes are flat, I'm just going down the order of flats, until I get the number of flats I want, the same way I did with the order of sharps.
Okay. And I don't know if this is the same kind of thing that you were referring to, but say, for example, if I see a key signature and it has four flats in it, I count from left to right, B, E, A, D. That fourth flat is going to be a D flat, right?
Right.
That last flat from left to right, that last flat will be the fourth of whatever key you're in.
Exactly, right, because remember we were flatting the fourth as we were going, in the case of flats, we were going counterclockwise on the circle of fifths. If you don't like counting up 4 for some reason, you can also think of it as counting down 5. Mm-hmm. So if I started at the top of my C major scale and went down 5, C, B, A, G, F, we would end on the same note, and then play that note and flat the fourth of that scale and B flat. It's the same thing, counting up 4 or counting down 5. If that's helpful. If you find that confusing, then just forget I even said it and just count up 4.
Or just say Big Ed and Dan go camping frequently.
Big Ed, Dan go, maybe you should go camping with Big Ed and Dan.
Yeah.
They sound like some fun guys.
They do it often. Well, let's do a quick review then of everything. Basically, starting off with the half step and whole step pattern for the major scale. That would be whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half.
Yes.
That's a good way to memorize the pattern. Define chromatic.
A chromatic half step is a half step in which you did not change the name of the note. For example, A to A sharp
would be chromatic. And then diatonic
would be a half step in which the name of the note changed. A to B flat, for example, in the B flat major scale, the leading tone.
And then enharmonic equivalents.
Enharmonic equivalents would be a note that has two different names, but you're still talking about the same note. For example, G sharp and A flat, or A sharp and B flat.
Okay. So the circle of fifths, in a nutshell.
Right, circle of fifths in a nutshell. To find the number of sharps in any sharp key signature, meaning any key that starts on a white key, and also F sharp and C sharp, but not F, you start with C, you count up 5 notes, you play that scale, and then you sharp the 7th. And then you continue with that scale you just played, count up 5, keep the note that you just sharped, and then sharp the 7th again. And keep doing that until you wind up at C sharp, which is a scale in which all the notes are sharp.
Right.
For the flats, you count up 4. You can also think of it as counting down 5, but you count up 4, you play that scale, and you flat the 4th note, and then you have the next scale along counterclockwise along the circle of fifths. You keep doing that. You play that scale, keeping the flat that you flatted, which is going to be easy in this case because it's just the tonic note, and you will continue to flat the 4th, and you will get all those flat keys, leading all the way up to C flat, which is a key of all flats,
which is also enharmonically equivalent to
B major.
All right.
And which do you think you see more often, B major or C flat major?
I don't think I've ever seen anything in the key of C flat major.
No, B major is easier, right? It only has 5 sharps versus 7 flats.
I know. Less to keep up with.
Yeah, less to keep up with. B major is much easier to deal with than C flat major, right? B major only has 5 sharps versus 7 flats in C flat major. So you'll see B major more often, except for extreme circumstances of modulation and things, which we can get into later. Same thing for the key of C sharp major. C sharp major is enharmonically equivalent to D flat major. Only 5 flats, B, E, A, D, G. So much easier to deal with than all 7 sharps. And you'll certainly never see G sharp major. I shouldn't say never. Good tip, professors. One day you guys will be teaching classes. Never say never. You are begging your students to find an example of whatever you just said, and they will do it.
And they'll Google it in 5 minutes.
They will Google it in 5 minutes. Yeah, they will have it. You used to would only deal with this the next day of class. Now you're dealing with it immediately.
Not if they're being good students, because they shouldn't be Googling in the first place.
Right, yes, but we all know how life goes.
Right.
Reality versus the ideal world. Mm-hmm. So I will not say that you will never see G sharp major or D sharp major. You will definitely see those, especially if you ever have the fortune of playing a Bruckner symphony. But very rarely will you see G sharp major, because as we touched on, G sharp major would actually, if you went around the circle of fifths until you found G sharp major, you would actually end up with F double sharp. D sharp major would have F double sharp and C double sharp.
And F double sharp represents itself as an X, right?
Right, yeah, a little X on the and a double flat is just two flats.
Right.
So G sharp, much easier to think about A flat, right? A flat's only got 4 flats, whereas in G sharp you have 6 sharps and 1 double sharp. In D sharp,
does that count as 8 sharps?
Does that count as 8 sharps? Probably, kind of, yeah.
To hell with all that.
Yeah, exactly, right? Not something you genuinely have to worry about. So enharmonics help us out, and you hopefully are getting a sense of, when to say G sharp and when to say A flat, even though we're talking about the same notes.
And to finish up the review, order sharps and flats, I think that, the mnemonic devices work really good.
Yes.
If not, like I said, looking at a key signature, sharps from left to right, the last sharp on the right would be the leading tone of the scale, or the 7th of the scale that the key is in. Looking at your flat key signatures, from left to right, the last flat would be the 4th of whatever key you're in.
Absolutely correct. And remember, when we're talking about the order of sharps, what we're talking about is, it is great to know that E has 4 sharps in it, and imperative to know that E has 4 sharps in it, or that A flat has 4 flats in it. When you want to know what flats those are, what of those 4 notes are actually flat, then you're talking about the order of flats, B, E, A, D, G, C, F, or the order of sharps, F, C, G, D, A, E, B. One thing that you will, while we're talking about scales, some things that you need to know, we have big, impressive names for the scales, for the notes in the scale. So you don't always have to say the 3rd note of the scale or the 6th note of the scale. That becomes kind of cumbersome. So in theory, we will start very quickly talking about the names of these scale degrees. And you can say scale degree 1, scale degree 2. What it just means is, the first note of the scale, the tonic, or the 2nd note of the scale. We also have other names for them.
And this is more about the function it performs rather than the number and sequence, right?
Absolutely. This becomes more about the function it performs, and it also is just it's lingo that you will hear your professor use.
Right.
So we probably already know this, but the first scale degree is the tonic. We've heard that term before. The name for scale degree 2 is the supertonic. Supertonic, 1 note above the tonic in the scale.
Okay.
Yeah. The 3rd is called the mediant. And the reasons for that are historical in nature. It was halfway between the tonic and the 5th note, where we're counting on the circle of fifths.
So if you're doing for example, if you're doing an arpeggio, if we're doing a major arpeggio, that is the very middle of the chord.
Yeah, the middle. The 4th scale degree is the subdominant. They call it that because it is below the 5th note, which we then call the dominant. Tonic and dominant, one of the most important relationships in all of music. We're getting a glimpse of that when we talk about the circle of fifths, counting up 5 or down 5. But definitely one of the most important relationships, and you'll see that for the rest of your life.
Wasn't there a theorist who said that pretty much if you really, really simplify it, all music can be, or all Western tonal music can be kind of reduced to a 1-5 progression?
Absolutely. There've been a lot of theorists that have postulated that. One of the most famous, Heinrich Shankar, who basically considered all music to basically be a move from the tonic to the dominant that then resolves back to the tonic. Heavy stuff. Yeah.
So moving on.
Moving on from the dominant, we go up and we have the submediant. And it's called that because it is the same distance below the tonic that the mediant is above it.
Right.
And that is our scale degree 6.
Right.
The submediant. And then scale degree 7 is called the subtonic because it is below the tonic. You will often also hear it called the leading tone. Perfectly perfectly valid. Just keep in mind that it is only the leading tone when it is actually a half step below the tonic.
Right.
As it always is in the major scale because of the pattern of half steps and whole steps we have. There will be other times when it is not. And just a little sort of point of order, it is only a leading tone if it's a half step below the tonic. If it's a whole step below the tonic, then it's just the subtonic.
Right.
And then, of course, we get back to the tonic. So just very quickly, tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant, submediant, subtonic, which in this case is also leading tone, tonic.
Cool.
Very important stuff to know.
Well, that concludes our discussion of major scales and key signatures and how to identify them.
Yes, and as always, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have other ways of learning these things, because there are a ton out there, please send those to us. This stuff can be a little tricky until you get the hang of it, until you really know what you're dealing with. So we are here to help you.
And don't get discouraged.
Right, yeah, and don't go drinking with Big Dan and Ed. Those guys are bad news. Or Big Ed and Dan, rather. Right, those guys are bad news.
If you found this information helpful, please share it with a friend. We love new listeners. For questions or comments, you can reach us at info@musicstudent101.com.